As I was listening to MR talk about yesterday's proceedings, I think a lot of the strategy discussion was around what strategists call Horizon 1, or perhaps Horizon 2 issues. How do you make money this year, and how might you make money next year? And what I want to do is take the other half of the agenda of this conference, which is blueprint for the rest of the decade. I'm going to try to stretch the horizon out to Horizon 3 and kind of look at what's happening to the larger game, and how might the industry restructure itself over this decade in a way that would create a lot of opportunities as well as a lot of threats for virtually everyone in this room. So that's kind of where we're going to try to head. So I want to kick off this thing with systems of record. This was a talk that was given 3 years ago. I want to kind of give you an update on where that is. Move into this notion called orchestrating the stack. That's sort of a code phrase for what I think is going to be the key rhythm in the industry over the rest of the decade. And then particularly focus in on what we call guerrilla games, which is, okay, what are the big established players going to do under the pressure of these industry changes? Because that kind of affects what everybody else does as well. Okay? So how are they going to be moving? And then if you are one of them, that's one issue. And if you're not, then how do you move in relation to the bigger players in the industry? So let me start with systems of record. This is an idea that came out in 2000. The question was, we began to see the application sector consolidating, and the question was, would it consolidate back to just one company? And would there just be sort of one category with one company and everything would be a module? And if it wasn't going to do that, what was going to stop it from doing that? And so we came up with this notion of a system of record. And the idea was that an IT organization would organize itself around some number of systems of record that corresponded to the key attributes of the business that they were in service to. And we said, well, if there were going to be more than one system of record, how would we know what constitutes a system of record as opposed to a module? And we proposed 4 criteria. The first one is that it have sufficient scope. The second one, that it have clout. And by clout, we meant it had to be owned by somebody who was a CXO, not the CEO. Someone reporting to the CEO who had a domain within the corporation and could have a system of record that would be specialized to serve that domain. It had to have value on the core economics of the business, and it had to have inertial flywheel capability, meaning it had to have enough data going through it that it really, really mattered. It couldn't be one of those things that only 5 people used, like an M&A system, for example, which is incredibly strategic, but by this criteria would not be a system of record. We used ERP as kind of the anchor defining category for a system of record because it has the kind of scope that was required. It's owned by the CFO. It has value both in terms of compliance, control, integration of operations, and it has an anchor transaction, meaning a high volume repeated transaction, in this case any update to the general ledger. And we said the reason why what ERP benefits from, there's a number of attributes to the ERP category that benefit from the fact that it's a system of record. So it is persistent. I mean, it's extremely difficult to imagine a future 10 or 15 years from now which doesn't have an ERP anchor to it. It's very hard to imagine that. And it has an exclusivity, meaning once you own, one of the implications of this thing, and it's a little bit of a theory, but was that no CXO could own 2 systems of record. So if you own one system of record and you occupied that CXO, game over. Nobody else was going to get the CFO. So that meant that they were taken off the board as a sponsor for systems of record. So then the question was, well, what about the chief sales officer or the chief, the VP of operations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we got to this issue from a market point of view that depending on how many other CXOs, you could get to sponsor systems of record, you might have a sense of what the unit of turf was and how many units of turf might there be. So this question about how many more of these systems could there be. So we put up 4 candidates in 2000, I think it was 2000, 2001, I can't remember which year this was. We were at the Ritz-Carlton in Half Moon Bay, lovely spot. But we put these 4 up, and we kind of walked through each one, and we kind of asked each other, what do we think? And we ran them against the criteria. We saw how they stacked up. We saw how the criteria stacked up, and we voted our conclusions at the end. And as it turned out, we voted the first 3 in as systems of record, and we voted the 4th one out as a system of record. So we said, okay, we think there are 4, not 1, but not 5. Well, so what's happened since then? The first thing that happened was we had a little downturn you may have heard of. It might have influenced even your business. So what that does, what a downturn does, it pulls spending way, way back, huge advantage to incumbent categories, huge disadvantage to anybody trying to create a new category, and also huge advantage to gorillas as opposed to anybody other than the gorilla. There's just a very kind of run to the castle mentality that happens in a downturn. And so it really did slow down the development of all of these issues. Category development got stunted, particularly in the supply chain and CRM. They were both inside the tornado in the late 90s. They both kind of hit a boom. And the supply chain hit a boom, boom, okay? I mean, it really got clobbered because a lot of it was specifically in tech, and the tech downturn was kind of the worst of this thing. CRM just got a boom, okay? But today, you know, the gorilla in ERP is a $50 billion market cap company, and the gorilla in CRM is a $4 billion market cap company. So it's a big deal. As far as the product lifecycle management tornadoes and the ERM tornadoes, they just didn't develop. They developed departmentally, but they didn't develop into these takeoff things. The product system of record, you know, companies like Agile, Matrix Ones, other folks like that, very interested in this product system of record. It did not take advantage. It was too late to get into that tornado, so it kind of came out into the downturn, which made its coming out party a little bit tragic, frankly. But you know, everybody deals with it, and we move on, and value gets created. So the recovery laid out a bunch of new ground rules. We've been experiencing them. Buyer power's up. By the way, your customers are united in one thought. They hate you. Okay? Just universally, globally, and collectively. So as a result, the industry's got a lot of cleaning up to do. Other thing, the government has re-entered. The Sarbanes-Oxley, et cetera. Compliance is a big deal. We call it sometimes the Europeanization of American business. A little bit discouraging for those of us who are libertarians. The net impact, ERP modules compete effectively for category funds. So a bunch of funds that might have gone to the other categories didn't. Okay, they went to ERP instead, and a bunch of people added the module as opposed to adding the system of record. So it just played against the dynamics of category formation. I would argue that CRM and SCM got through it. They're probably never going to tornado again, right? But they got through it in a sort of muted way. So they're permanent parts of the landscape, but they're a little bit less powerful, maybe a lot less powerful, but at least a little bit less powerful. Even though the CXOs are powerful, the systems are not as powerful. Product lifecycle management, employee relationship management, I think are still pre-tornado. They're largely departmental. Where they get in, they're extremely powerful, but you haven't had the sort of mass adoption. And now, with buyers being very skeptical and angry about the impact of mass software adoption, we may be a long way away from the next application tornado. Perhaps more importantly in this thing, however, there's been another thing happening. Because we've kind of put technology innovation on hold for 4 years. Not the technology people, but the buying community and the industry, because we've been working our way through this problem. So the application layer, you know, is not the only layer that could have a system of record. There are other layers in the architecture that can too. And the underlying architecture of enterprise computing, I'm going to argue today, has been shifting. It hasn't yet shifted at the surface, but the tectonics underneath, I actually shouldn't use that metaphor in the city, are becoming increasingly volatile or whatever. Stress is building up on the fault line, right? And a new and bigger game is emerging, potentially the biggest ever. And we call this game orchestrating the stack. So what do we mean by orchestrating the stack? This is a kind of a vision of industry structure which I'd like you to consider as a possible blueprint for looking at the rest of this decade and into the next decade. So it's a very slow-moving, glacial, tectonic thing. This is not something it's going to happen tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. But the stack is a metaphor that has been hanging around most of the 90s. It came out of the Sun and the open systems movement. Actually, Ed Zander was the first guy that used the stack. Ed couldn't be here today, so he asked me to give this speech. He's busy on the phone or whatever he's doing. But anyway, the deal here is we have layers and layers of systems technology that make up this complex thing we call enterprise IT. And I've sort of bracketed at the top and the bottom with two technologies, with a consulting technology, which is not part of the stack, and a microprocessor technology, which is kind of not part of the stack. And most CIOs don't make a microprocessor decision, right? But the idea is everything in between kind of is. And in every one of these things, you could ask yourself the question, is there a system of record? Does every layer have a system of record? Are there multiple systems of record? What do you do once you get outside the application or transaction application side? Because basically, the system of record idea that we've talked about was just doing the line called transaction applications. So we're kind of taking this thing further out and asking ourselves the question, how does this structure play out, particularly under the stress of this underlying technological change that I think we're going to see?